Hello, welcome everyone to our virtual lunch hour with Protect PT. I'm Jillian Graber, Executive Director of Protect PT, and I am joined today by a guest from around the globe, um, Inken Behrmann. She is a climate campaigner from Germany, and it's Inken. Is it 6 o'clock there in Germany right now?
Yes, it is. It's 6 p.m., right?
Well, thank you for joining us today. It is noon here, and we are really excited to have you on today. Inken is she had fought in the resistance against coal energy with Ende Gelände, which means here and no further, and organized mass actions of civil disobedience to ignite to in and I don't know how to say this, ignite minds. Um, Last year, she focused on taking um, on, t- on taking mobility transmission and car industry. Currently, she's campaigning for climate justice with the organization Campact. So I don't know if I said all of those words correctly. I probably butchered it crazy. But so that's just kind of a little introduction and bio of Inken. And so we wanted to start out by talking about some of the experiences that you've had with organizing and climate action in Germany. And, we'll kind of start from there, and we're going to have a really great conversation. Today, if folks want to join in the conversation, they can do that. Just feel free to chat us in your window, in your chat window on YouTube. And tell us a little bit about some of your experiences.
Right. Thank you very much for inviting me today to your lunch hour. Right. As Jillian said, it's 6 p.m. here, but I'm very, I'm hoping you're all having a great lunch. Right. So, and thank you very much for the introduction. I'm living in Germany, in Berlin, and I've been working in the climate movement for a couple of years now. And as Jillian said, I started out with organizing mass actions of civil disobedience in lignite mines, which is the brown form of coal that we mine in Germany still and burn. And I was part of organizing resistance and occupations of those lignite mines in Germany. And now I'm currently campaigning with Campact, which is the German sister organization of Move On, which some of you might know. And we're more in the part of organizing mass demonstrations, petitioning online, for forms of that. And so I might just tell you a tiny little bit about the situation in Germany, the climate situation in Germany, and then I brought a couple of slides showing the different forms of actions that we take to kind of reach carbon neutrality fast enough.
Yeah,
And then I'm very, very excited to hear some questions and talk to you and with you guys about your gas resistance.
sounds good.
Awesome. So in Germany, we have so Germany always have probably, and we talked about this before, also with Jillian, Patrick, and Mary, that Germany always has a very, very good climate image. Like everybody around the world thinks Germany's very good on track with climate policy and with carbon neutrality. Reality is we are really not, but we're actually still mining lignite, so brown coal, and burning it. And last year we had a commission on coal, was like there was a name to kind of talk about and negotiate the coal phase out in Germany, and they decided that the coal phase out should be in 2038. So it's still almost 20 years of coal mining ahead of us, and that's just way too long if we want to have any chance of reaching the 1.5 degree or 2 degree goal of limiting climate change to that to those degrees. And there's one part, and the other part is like if we talk about climate change and like emissions responsible for climate change, like the big sectors always are producing warmth, producing energy, and the mobility sector. And so in part of the energy production, I just said that we still use a lot of coal. And part of the mobility transition, for example, the problem is that our mobility sector hasn't decreased in carbon emissions since 1990 for like any single bit. So we are still producing as much carbon in our mobility sector as we did in 1990. And that's just a huge problem also because we don't have policies on track to reach the 1.5-degree goal. And so what we do then is that's why we have a pretty big climate movement in Germany that's trying to demascate the government, but also trying to get like some real action into going. And I'll just kind of tell you a tiny little bit about the different forms of action that we take. And Patrick, if you want to go to the first slide. Right, that is a part of the organization I'm with currently. It's called Campact, and they often start with online petitioning. So this, for example, is a petition where there's about not signing the Mercosur negotiation, which is a negotiation with Brazil, but which would allow if all of the countries take part in this deal, that kind of ends up in really firing up the forest deforestation that's happening in Brazil with a lot of fires and everything. So often if we start a campaign, we start with an online petition and we kind of try to find out if that's something that people can unite behind. But the online petition is often just a starting point. So Patrick, if you want to go to the next slide. Right, that is one of the very big climate marches we had last year. So from online, we often try to move offline in any kind of offline action. And one of those is that we try to organize mass demonstrations that are able to impress the government enough so that they will take any action. And there's one of my colleagues standing there and all these people are part of the climate marches last year. So these are a lot of young people because last year, in the whole wake of this coal commission I was talking about earlier, that was responsible for negotiating the coal phase out. This young climate movement formed in Germany that has formed all around the world, but has been pretty strong in Germany. And they brought, I think this is a demonstration in November, but in September they actually brought in Germany 1.4 million people on the street, which is for like German relations really, really, really big. Right, if you want to go to the next slide. Right, there's another picture of the climate marches last year, where also then a lot of kind of young people mixed with old people. So we also tried to kind of merge the young, new climate, very energetic climate movement with more of the older and more established environmental movement in Germany, which has been traditionally pretty strong. So there's one guy in the middle of the picture who's holding a sign that says that senior citizens demonstrating for the future of the youth. So that was also very nice. Right, moving on to the next slide. That is what we do too. We are focusing on the big actions, but we also try to do small actions if there's like any decision moment. So if like a commission is meeting and this is like the white building in the background is the seat of the German Chancellor. Looks very different from the White House. It has nicknamed the washing machine because if you look at it, it looks a tiny little bit like a washing machine. And so we do these, and the two puppets up front is like Angela Merkel, our chancellor, and Peter Altmaier, our Minister of Economy and Energy. And so we also, if there's like an event happening, like in real politics, we try to do small protest events with like a couple of people that would come to kind of sign that there's protest against this coal phase out in this case. So if you want to move to the next one, right. And then it's kind of debatable how successful the climate movement in Germany has been because it has been massive last year. There were loads of people on the street. However, in like real political impact, we have to kind of admit that we have not really seen any change in terms of a really good climate policy or a really good climate law that would hold us to the 1.5 or 2 degree track. So some people decided this is not enough, and we need to move onwards from demonstrations to civil disobedience, and that is what Ende Gelände does. This is a picture of an Ende Gelände action. So this is is open pit mining that's done in Germany in 3 regions still. And all of these people in the white suits are kind of activists of Ende Gelände that are going on to block the lignite mine. And if you go to the next slide, right, this is where they're sitting then. So this is like the dimension of the whole mining project. And these are the people blocking it for a day. Which has been, it's pretty good and pretty cool actions. And it's also it's very necessary, but it's also really fun because a lot of activists from different countries and different parts of Europe often even come to kind of protest this injustice happening in the middle of Europe. So, right. And then moving on to the next slide. Right, this is another picture of Ende Gelände. You can see there's just really a lot of people. The actions have grown a lot, also because starting with Ende Gelände in 2014, we were kind of able to focus the whole climate discourse on coal a lot, because it's like the rationale was that coal is the fastest, the phase out of coal would be the fastest way to reduce emissions in Germany. So the climate movement took on coal and kind of focused on that. And the actions have grown a lot. And with the actions of climate movement, the climate movement as a whole has grown a lot. So this is the people actually walking towards one of these coal power plants to block it.
Thanks.
Right, and then I think I'm coming to the last part of my little intro. This almost the last part. This is then last year we were kind of deciding, well, we did a lot around coal, but we need to look at the other sectors as well. And so we started to also try to form a movement against or for the energy, for the mobility transformation. For the mobility transformation. So away from cars towards bicycles, trains. And in comparison to the US, Germany is doing comparatively well. However, if you look at the policies, Germany is very, very dependent on the whole automobile industry, Volkswagen, BMW, Audi, a lot of German car companies that are responsible for a lot of the economic growth. And to really tackle the mobility transition, thus is a pretty big project. And last year we started, and we also looked for new forms of engagement and protest forms, because if you kind of move from coal to mobility, it's kind of clear that you kind of look for a different mode of action. And so we did this pretty big critical mass. Critical mass is it's a term in Germany for if you have a critical mass of 16 people on a bike, they count as one vehicle, and that means that they can cross over streets and crossings and lights and everything. And so we try to form this really, really big group of bicycles and people on bicycles, and so they are able to just move through the city and demonstrate for their thing. And so we did a really, really big critical mass last year at one of the automobile exhibitions. So we tried also to tackle one place where politics and the automobile industry really get together and form their kind of political, economic bonds. And then if we move forward, right, we also try to combine that with civil disobedience. So some people actually went up. You kind of see the look again with the white suits. It has begun to be like a branding somewhat of the disobedient climate movement in Germany. So they try to block that, and they have a very nice this very nice sign which says how's it called, child yards instead of parking lots. So it's also about how you use space in the city for people and not for cars. Right, and then this year, like moving to the last slide, I think. Right, so this year, Corona and COVID-19, as probably in the US too, has changed everything. I showed the pictures of the big mass demonstrations. There's kind of a big thing, like assembling a lot of people that feel empowered by marching in big crowds and doing stuff together. So Corona has kind of changed everything, and we had to look for new forms of protest. And two things we've come up with up until now are, one's critical masses with bikes, because people on bikes normally have a lot of distance and they're moving outside. And then another thing that we did when the German government was debating about economic help for the automobile industry, and they wanted to, they did that in the crisis in 2008, and they wanted to do it again to install payments to everybody that would buy a car, but that would buy a car with a with an old gas motor. So I'm kind of missing the word right now, but so that would kind of install a lot of fossil fueled cars again for the years to come. So we kind of built this people's chain, and they were always holding these things to keep the distance of 1.5 meters. That's mandatory in Germany. And everybody was wearing masks, and it was pretty successful. And like when we did this in May, we and a lot of other people naturally were actually able to stop the kind of money gift for the automobile industry. And we are going to protest again next Tuesday, because they're kind of trying again now. Right, and so that's like just a little overview about what I've been doing here and what we have been coming up with as modes of action in the climate movement. And naturally, now I'm also very curious to hear, as we talked about this before, that we have been focusing on a lot of resistance, and you're often focusing more on also using legal means, which I'm very interested in too. So I'm also very interested in what's going to come up in the talk.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Inken, for that overview. And I think that, so I have a couple questions actually that came up, and we can start discussing. And if folks have questions online on YouTube, please let us know. But the first thing I wanted to mention is, I guess the first question that I had is, here in the US, we have folks that we call like climate deniers. They deny that climate change is happening, and that fossil fuels and basically human consumption and use is causing the earth to warm. Do you guys have that type of resistance in Germany as well?
So I've never, like in the past, it never has been a big thing, which I believe is also due to the fact that Germany is a very, very science-oriented country. And people just like science and natural sciences just have a very high value to people. So I think that's one part why climate change denial is not really big. Another one is that we have, our media landscape is just a little different from yours. Like we still have a lot of public media, or public funded media. And we don't have this big divide as in the US, like between CNN and Fox News, but we have basically we have one big media, or two big media outlets, and then a lot of newspapers, and a lot of the newspapers are privately owned, but the big news channels on TV, the two big ones, are publicly funded, and that kind of establishes a more uniform like ground of knowledge. And in those media, like climate change denial was never a big thing. However, since 2014, we have a growing right-wing populist party too, and in some parts they have a pretty big campaign against traditional media and traditional parties. And so among those people, climate change denial is definitely a bigger thing. Although I would say the German version of that is not as much, no, climate change is not happening. It's more like, we don't really have a big impact on that.
Right.
So they're not denying that climate changing, but they are more like on the side of this has always been happening. It's not our fault.
Right.
Or on the other side of the U, then kind of move to our more conservative and more economy centered party. They're just saying, no, we're actually doing everything we can and it will be sufficient. We just need some more time. And the economy should not, like the economy still needs to thrive. And then everywhere where we have this kind of thing of some economies will lose. I'm sorry, but like the automobile industry in Germany, that's not going to be the future. Or the coal industry in Germany, I'm sorry, it's going to have to go. There, then the conservatives and kind of economy-oriented people are like, no, we still have time. It's fine. And so I think that's a bigger problem in Germany, that like the government's very good in telling people they're doing enough while they're actually not doing enough.
Right. Yeah, and that's one thing that kind of struck me about Germany when hearing, news media and things like that. I heard a lot how Germany is doing so much to tackle climate change, and there are other countries that are doing a lot to tackle climate change. This past year, I think it was the U.S. actually pulled out of the climate agreement with the French climate agreement that all these different countries around the world are a part of, and that was a big deal over here. But it's interesting to see that kind of similar things happen in other countries, and that we're seeing that there are people that use the economy and use the need for mobility and the need for us to consume this fossil fuel as a way to excuse what's happening to the planet. And so I think that's kind of interesting, that it's very similar to what we have here in that way. And Patrick, if you go to the next slide. So we had a video that you shared. Do we want to see this?
Oh yeah, if you're like interested in what Ende Gelände does, I think just it's a very powerful video of the last action that we did in November 2019.
Yeah.
In one of the open pit mines. And it has like subtitles in English. I'm sorry, like everything that people say is in German. So.
Nice. Well, you know what? If we have time, maybe we can play it at the end.
Yeah.
Because it would be really cool.
Or like people can use the link if they want to look it up.
Yeah, absolutely. And everyone can see the link there. And actually, I'm going to post another link on the screen right now, because it's kind of interesting. I was in a podcast with folks from Ende Gelände, with the Public Herald. They have the News Coup podcast, and I didn't actually talk to the folks. It was a completely separate interview, but the whole point of the podcast and the theme of the podcast was to kind of compare and contrast civil disobedience versus legal stuff. Like we do a lot of legal action. And so the title of the podcast is Will Laws or Civil Disobedience? And I think the rest of it is Stop Fossil Fuels. So you can check that out on, if anyone's interested more in Ende Gelände and what they do, you can check it out on the Public Herald podcast, the News Coup podcast. But I wanted to share a couple things with you. Patrick, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide. So we actually had something similar here. We had a climate strike here in September. Protect PT actually helped, one of the organizations that helped put the climate strike together with Fridays for Future youth organizers. And here you can actually see our mayor of Pittsburgh. He is getting ready to speak, and also one of the representatives, Sarah Innamorato. She has been a real champion for public health in our area, because I think that one of the things that maybe we haven't talked about so far is, beyond climate change and, fossil fuel extraction and the burning of fossil fuels harming the climate in the world, it's also harming people. And so, that's Sarah Innamorato has recently talked to folks about, what legislators can do. She's a representative, what legislators can do to, what politicians can do to help, especially with the human health factor. So that's really important. And actually, the other day when we were talking about kind of the motivation behind some of the work that we do, and we were talking about the fact that a lot of folks call climate campaigners or climate activists or people like us that fight fossil fuels, they call them environmentalists, and it's like the people trying to put us in this box, to say like, well, why do you care so much about the environment when we need fossil fuels because we need to drive our cars and we need to, we need heat and we need energy. But I think what they're missing is the reason why a lot of us do what we do is not just for the climate, but it's also for human health impacts. And ultimately, like, there's no planet B. There's no way we can go somewhere else to live on another planet. That doesn't exist. So, we got to take care of the one we have, really for the benefit of humans. So I think that really that message gets missed a lot. Do you guys have that same thing go on in your neck of the woods?
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, we had like that's definitely something that has been happening, and that's why we're always saying like we're a climate justice movement, and we have the slogan that I think I still haven't translated very well, but it's something like in the lines of for a long time now it has not been about polar bears. So it's like, which kind of says like it's not about nature. Or we actually had another like befriended movement in the Netherlands, and they had pretty cool stickers on which like you could read, we're not defending nature, we are nature defending itself. So they were kind of looking at this inclusive understanding of we together with the earth, and we're living on the earth. But also, if we look at like us as a climate justice movement, what we always try to say is it's not about like anything that's separate from us, but it's also about other people, and it's about people in the global south first, because I mean we're kind of producing climate change in the global north and by kind of our way of living. But people in I don't know, Bangladesh, living at the coastal lines, they are like the ones that have problems now harvesting their crops. Or like people on the Fiji Islands, they are the ones that are right now losing their livelihoods because they're just drowning, like the islands are drowning now.
Yeah.
And people in Northern Africa are having droughts right now because of climate change, and they like climate change is really, really endangering their livelihoods. But also, if we look at Germany, for example, we have the same problems here because if you look at the justice aspect, for example, in the transition in the mobility sector, you can see that people, mostly poorer people, live on big streets. And then if you look again at the emissions, people, mostly those poorer kids, get a lot of the emissions from cars. And it's kind of, you have signs showing that those people are then doing, or those kids are actually then doing worse in school. And so like via these environmental impacts of how we live and how our mobility sector works, we are also promoting social injustice. And so if we're fighting against these things like coal energy, or for like better warmth and better isolation in houses, or for the mobility transition, it's always about it's about climate, but it's also always about people that are actually today living in the impacts
Yeah.
that you can't see, because it's just like it's the environment, it's in the earth, in the air and everything, and so you can't see it directly, but it's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, a couple months ago, we had a young activist on, Jasa Hunter Mellers. She came on. She was in this film called Words Have Power, and it's with the Young Voices for the Planet. And she was talking about one of the power plants near her home, and all of the kids in her neighborhood were getting sick. And in fact, one of her friends died of asthma, and so she kind of felt like she needed to do something about it, and she started this entire campaign to shut down the power plant. And actually it worked. She was able to shut it down. So We're really excited. those are the kind of things that and this picture in particular, this is another picture from the climate strike we had back in September of last year. This wonderful mother brought her kids, and her young son had a lot to say. And we're going to talk later before we leave about what's going on next week, but we have some really exciting things going on next week for youth. But right now we also have a question from Patricia. She asks, watching the tour, France has one of the largest fossil farms in Europe, 112,000 panels. Does Germany terrain and weather allow for solar, and are you headed in that direction? That's a great question. Thanks, Trish.
Mm-hmm. So Germany has, I think, where a lot of the good, or very good climate image of Germany comes from, is that we have a very, very progressive renewable energy law, which kind of I think it was enacted in 2002 or maybe in 1998. But anyway, and the last time the Social Democratic and Green Party worked together in government, they installed the renewable energy law. And that was in Germany, but actually in all of Europe, a pretty big starting point, because they ensured that people could plant wind farms and would get a revenue for it that was guaranteed for, I think, 20 or 30 years. So because the investing costs of wind turbines are so high, you kind of need it for normal people and corporations to be able to do that, and not only big firms. You needed some kind of insurance that they would get revenues for it to pay off the investment costs. And so that was the renewable energy law. And so in that wake, Germany has gone very much in the direction of wind power. So in certain areas of Germany, mostly Eastern Germany and some parts of Northern Germany where there's a lot of wind, we have a lot of wind energy. We are also putting more wind energy offshore, which also has some damaging impact though for the sea. So it's it's a controversial issue. And there has been a very big solar industry in Germany too. And we have solar farms. However, it needs to be a lot more. We still have a lot of roofs, for example, that we are not using the potential of roofs in cities, which is a problem. Mm-hmm. And so that is parts that we are debating right now in the wake of there will come next year again. They're doing a kind of a reactualization of this renewable energy law every couple of years, and there will be a next one next year. And they're debating right now how they what the goal for the building up of solar energy will be. And the Conservative Party has a very different idea than what would be necessary. So we were once pretty good in that area. However, a lot of the industry has died because they were cut off of subventions, and so a lot of the industry has actually gone to China, and so we're not as good anymore as we were in that area. That's what I would say.
Yeah, and so it sounds like you have a lot of different diverse ways to generate energy besides fossil fuels. Tell me, what are some of the most successful actions that you've been a part of, and why do you think that those actions were successful?
Mm-hmm. Well, so to kind of make everything a little more complicated, it definitely depends on how you define success. I mean, I think one of the most successful action that I personally was part of were the first Ende Gelände actions, because they were very, very effective discursively and putting climate up front as an issue that needs to be addressed when we had a government that had really zero interest in addressing climate change policy. So, and we were kind of able to make the issue so central with the German population that they actually needed to to talk about the climate protection law last year. It was very successful with the Ende Gelände actions and with the Fridays for Future demonstrations last year. So they really need to act on those. Materially, it's kind of a different thing. That's what I was like saying earlier. We had a lot of successes with placing issues in the concrete policy process about laws and about kind of installing binding goals. We have still a big problem, and we actually, frankly, haven't been very successful. And that's, I think, one thing that we are thinking about now too, is if we need to look at different tactics and different strategies. Right now we're campaigning very much. Next year we're gonna have federal elections too. So right now we are campaigning pretty hard to get the Green Party into office and ensure that they have goals that are radical enough that if they're in office, they're gonna enact laws that are sufficient.
Yeah. And so what do you think are some things that will push that boundary, or some things that maybe people will wake up and think about climate change in a different light, those policymakers? What do you think?
Interesting question. I think the thing is that like a lot of people know about climate change, but they don't get how real and how dangerous it is and how fast it's moving.
Yeah.
In part because climate scientists are really not a crowd of people that are very alarming. They're just like often very, very rational and very down to earth, which is nice and very I sympathize with that a lot, but I think a lot of politicians haven't really grasped how dangerous this is. And that, like, we're always saying there are no jobs on a dead planet, that actually if we're not saving this planet, the economy will not help you anymore. So
right.
I think it's also about it's more about waking up to the priorities and like prioritizing climate policy. And for that, you probably also just need a different party in office, because like the Conservative Party is just very close to industry policy and to the industries, and naturally also gets a lot of grants from the automobile industry, for example. And so there are also a lot of financial dependencies. Also, if you look at coal and who's paying taxes where, there are just a lot of financial dependencies on these very, very big corporations. So I think one thing is that politicians maybe need to wake up to the priorities, but another thing is that we just like as a state have to be independent of big fossil fuel companies, and that's a whole different and probably more difficult field to engage in.
Yeah, and it's funny that you said that the Conservative parties, maybe that's in power right now, is not focusing on this because they're focusing on gifts to the mobile industry, and it's very much like that in our country as well. But it's not just the Conservative party. There are many people in the Democratic Party as well that give, like, for instance, in Pennsylvania, we have a Democratic governor and many folks in the Democratic Party, and they still are pushing fossil fuels, and mainly because of the jobs. They're like, well, because a lot of these party members are interested in promoting union jobs, and that's been a really big issue because like you were saying, there are no jobs on a dead planet. That's so true, because not only that, but you would think that the union leaders that are promoting that are supposed to be promoting these really safe, economically stable jobs would realize that the fossil fuel industry is a boom and bust industry. It very much is not sustainable without government gifts. And so if
Yeah.
we can focus our energies on these green jobs, these sustainable jobs, not only would we have probably safer jobs, jobs that will not endanger the health of the workers, but we will also have jobs that are long term, more sustainable, and more economically viable. And so that is
Yeah.
a big thing that we try to tell politicians and union leaders, because it, that is a huge focus, the economy and jobs. But if people would just realize, I love how you said money gift, because we call them subsidies. So the
Right.
fossil fuel industry gets so many subsidies. They right here in southwestern PA, there's a cracker plant, and they I forget how many how much money they got to build this cracker plant. But the cracker plant, it's not going to make crackers. It's going to make it's going to crack the natural gas to make
Right.
little nurdles, plastic nurdles. So they're using natural gas to make plastic.
That's
And
crazy.
this is not something that we need in our world, because we have so much plastic, we don't even know what to do with all the garbage that we already have. And because the prices of natural gas are so low right now, this is another way for them to sell their product. Which actually last week we had a guest on talking about the economics of fracking and how it's just so economically unviable. And so it's just interesting, and I just love that phrase that you said. There are no jobs on a dead planet. I need to start telling politicians that same thing. And I'm wondering too, like we see climate change impacts at a obviously people that live on the coast see them from hurricanes. We have a tremendous amount of hurricanes for the coastal regions of the United States. But even here in our in southwestern PA, we've seen over the course of the last several years an increase in rainfall, and that rainfall is causing other issues. So Pennsylvania has a lot of water. We are a very water rich state, and so we have lots of wonderful natural water that's quite frankly being contaminated by the fossil fuel industry, and that's one big issue. But another issue is that when things are built, and so when economic and when development happens, development of homes for housing, development of natural gas well pads, we have fracking well pads. So all of these take up this earth that is retaining the water. Trees are cut down in order to make room for these things, and these trees are using this water. And so now we have a big water problem. We have a rainwater issue, a stormwater issue, that now we don't have the infrastructure to be able to keep up with the stormwater that we have. And now we're having an even bigger issue that in the waste dump. So the municipal waste dump where they dump all the garbage. So they're also in addition to taking garbage from people's homes, they're also taking waste from natural gas drilling. So all the drill cuttings, and then also they're taking a product and making the water solidified, so then they can throw the water in the solidified water into the garbage dump too. And now we're finding that there's radioactivity in our garbage dump, and then the water rainfall that's seeping through it is creating what's called leachate, and it's this like toxic tea, toxic landfill tea that's now they don't know what to do with it. They don't know how to get rid of it. So it's amazing that all the different things that are at play. And I think that climate change is a big part of that, part of the damage that's happening, locally and, around the world. Do you guys have things like that you're seeing in your country that are
Yeah.
results of climate change?
Yeah, I actually just like that resonated a lot with something that I saw today. A report on which has been a problem here is that in Eastern Germany, which is a very dry region traditionally, they had these very big lignite mines, and so in the lignite mines, when you mine the coal out, you need to dig very deep, and then you also come across iron, sulfate, very different parts of heavy metal, those things. And then if they after they kind of mined all the lignite out of the pit, the plan was, which I find crazy anyways, but the plan was to take water out of one of our bigger rivers and to kind of let it stream into this open pit mine and create one of the biggest, I think the biggest artificial lakes in Germany.
Wow.
And so now the problem is that the water that should go into the pit out of the Spree, which is the river, is not enough because of climate change. It has been so dry, like 3 years in a row now, that the river is not carrying enough water to actually let it flood into the pit. And so now some of the groundwater, or like the water that's there anyways. Well, I hope I'm not frozen.
No,
Am I frozen?
we
No, okay, good.
were for a minute, but we're back now.
Okay, awesome.
So that's weird. It said my streaming had stopped, but it wasn't. So and now my screen is green again. I'm not really sure what's going on here. So, but that's okay. We will continue for a little bit to make sure we can finish, because we have about 10 more minutes. And so it's okay if nobody can see me, as long as they can see you, our guest. So I wanted to ask you a question. What inspires you to do the organizing work that you do?
I think it's kind of the concern for the people that are suffering climate change, and that kind of encompasses our my kind of the people that I know, because I know that we are going to suffer under climate change, but it also extends to people I came to know from the Pacific Islands, for example, in 2017, when they were visiting Germany and telling about their islands drowning. And I think it's just like the very, very thing that I think it's just the climate change basically is the biggest threat to our civilization that exists. Like right now, we're moving on to around 3 to 4 degrees. Oh, I'm always talking about 1.5 degrees, right? That's Celsius. So in Celsius degrees, we're kind of moving onto 4 to 5 degrees of global warming right now. Nobody has any idea what's that going to do to the whole climate system. I mean, the last ice age was like only an average 2 or 3 degrees colder than it is right now. So if you kind of put that into perspective, we don't have any idea what's going to happen here. And it's like, really, it's a risk to civilization, and it's a risk to, this will kind of threaten lives, and will threaten livelihoods and water for people and food and everything. And so I think it's, if we're looking with any perspective on how we're going to live on this planet as a global society and as a global people. And so I'm Christian, so for me it's also a thing of we're going to live here together with the whole creation. It's the only chance that we have of living here together will be if we take radical action right now. And we don't have a lot of time left. We have like probably around 10 years left in which we can cut our emissions to around zero if we want to kind of take that chance. And so that's just why I think it's the most important issue for me, to organize around and to make people aware of that fact, and to see that we persuade people to take the radical action that we need right now. And that means moving out of fossil fuels, don't frack, don't mine coal, stop using gas, and kind of isolate your rooms and go by bike and by train. So and naturally also for me, sometimes there's problematic. I mean, I have relatives. I know that I have relatives in the U.S. So my grandfather used to live in Pennsylvania. So I also know that flying is something that sometimes you kind of have to make compromises, and it's not as straightforward. But actually, if you look at the climate science, it's very straightforward what we need to do. So
Yeah.
that is what motivates me.
Yeah, and maybe everything with going on with COVID, where we can't actually do as much as we normally were doing. One of the possible silver linings could be that we are not going on planes as much. We're doing virtual streams or videos with our relatives or friends and family in other countries or in other parts of the country that we're living in. And so perhaps that could be a silver lining. I don't know. I think that there's a lot of terrible things that have been happening as a result of COVID, but perhaps there are some good things as that will come out of it as well. Hopefully, I know one of the things that happened around here is they were saying that because of COVID, the emissions were better. We saw an increase in air quality as a result of not as many people going to work, driving to work. So did you find that happened in your country as well?
Yeah, we had like a couple of, so I think we had about two months where planes didn't fly really because people weren't able to travel or weren't allowed to travel. And in that time, and also in cities, people weren't going to work, but they were doing home office and everything. And in that time, we saw a really big increase in the air quality. We also saw in cities that because people were not going to work, they were using cars a lot less, and so they were going by bike a lot, and that also increased the air quality, but also just living quality in cities a lot, because it's just like a lot nicer to go by bike if there aren't a lot of cars on the street too.
Yeah.
So I think in terms of traveling, of mobility, and in those dimensions, we kind of got to know a little different lifestyle during COVID, and that might be a silver lining. I'm very interested in future more companies start to say, we're okay with not meeting face to face, but meeting via Zoom, for example, anything. So
Yeah.
we will see what happens, I guess.
Yeah. And it's weird because there must be something wrong with my program, and that's why it's showing me up as green, because it's also not showing. I'm also not able to pop up the comments and questions on the screen like I normally can. But we also have a comment. In light of what you just said, the current pandemic should be an eye opening of what is in store if things do not change. So I agree with that. There's a saying that the planet will be here even if us humans are not. The planet doesn't care whether we're here or not. In fact, it's actually better off if we're not here. So perhaps that is something that people need to think about when they think about climate change, and us as a as the humans on the planet. The Anthropocene era of this planet has been the most damaging to the planet out of all of the different eras that the planet has seen before. Us as humans have been here, and it will live on after we're gone. We just won't be able to live here. So, Patrick, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide. We're almost ready to go here. We just have a couple more minutes. So I want to mention to folks that please subscribe if you like our virtual lunch hours, and even if you can't join us live. I know a lot of people, if they're working, their lunch hour is very precious, and we totally get that. So if you can't meet us at lunch, you can also meet us afterward, and you'll know when those new podcasts or new videos come up, because if you subscribe, then you'll know every time we have a new broadcast. And please take our survey as well. I think the last part of the lunch hour bit.ly is chopped off there, but I believe it's just PPT lunch hour in the bit.ly. And so another thing, thank you, Mary, for putting that up in the chat as well. And if you click to the next slide, Patrick. So we also, next week, we actually have a journalist from Rolling Stone, Justin Noble. He's a pretty well-known journalist here in this neck of the woods, mainly because we do have a lot of oil and gas activity, and he has been reporting on radioactivity and in the oil and gas waste, which is a really interesting topic that we're going to chat about next week with him at noon. And then actually next Friday, and I thought we were going to put a slide in here about it, but that's okay. Next Friday, we're actually going to talk to students that might be interested in taking this type of action, taking some climate action, making a campaign. We're going to be teaching youth how to do that, how they can do something in their own community to impact and create change. And so, my screen's back up again. And so our guest wants to thank you, and we want to as well, Inken, for, she says, thank you. Your words are so important. And so we want to thank you for joining us today from Germany. And it was exciting to have you on. I think that it's really good to get a different perspective on things. And that's I think going to make us hopefully better as humans and better working to try to stop climate change in our world. We're certainly a global society and need to start acting like one. Right? So it was great to meet you, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you very much for having me and inviting me. It was very, very interesting, and I hope people enjoyed it.
Yeah, I think so. And and we can watch it on YouTube, and the link will be up after this. You can watch it again if you want to. And thanks everyone for joining us today. Have a great afternoon. Bye. Thanks, Inken. Bye.
Bye.